There's a natural progression out there, the private sector. People ask, how do they solve the turnarounds? They don't. They fail. But what they get to do is they get to inter the carcass and then use that to fertilize new ideas. We are stuck with systems that are a century or 2 centuries old that rest upon accreted decades of programs and policies and cultures and contracts. And the notion that we can unwind these systems or retool them to serve dramatically different purposes and dramatically different opportunities, I think is probably wishful thinking. And we need to think about how do we start to carve out room in SEAs and LEAs in our education space for people to solve problems in better, smarter ways. Thank you.
All right. All right.
I'm not sure I understood everything that you just said. Or the relevance of the Fortune 500 companies analogy, but I will say education is not a business. And the market offers us some ideas and insights, but in fact, I think it is absolutely the job of public education systems and democracies to build systems of good schools. If you go to Singapore, they'll say, all of our schools are good and some are great. And they're pretty right about that. I poked real hard when I've been there many times to look at the schools where Malay students who go to school, which is the indigenous population that was uneducated. They're still in schools that are well-resourced with high-quality teachers and with all of the materials necessary to teach the Singaporean curriculum, et cetera. I don't think that's impossible to do. Our highest achieving states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, New Jersey. Those are kind of, so occasionally Minnesota gets into that list, pops in and sometimes goes out. Those are states, let's put aside Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, which are tiny and very relatively homogeneous. They're wonderful places, they do good work. But let's think about Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey, which have significant numbers of students of color, low-income students, a lot more diversity, and have a little tiny bit more scale. And even for that matter, places like Minnesota. Those places compete with other countries. They are as high achieving as Singapore, Finland, and other countries. Connecticut got there with a very systemic reform 20 years ago, where they were forced by a lawsuit. By the way, Massachusetts did as well. They were forced by a lawsuit to equalize spending, to put in place a weighted student formula. They put in place thoughtful standards for student learning. They put in place thoughtful standards for teacher learning and teacher development. They resourced and raised the standards for teacher education and development. They put in place common programs across the state. And they continue to outperform states that have not made those kind of strategies. North Carolina would be another one that came from the bottom in the rankings. It was the first southern state to break the glass ceiling of the median state in the country. Almost the same set of reform issues over a 15-year period when Jim Hunt was the governor, keeping their eye on the ball. Build a system. Kids need schools that are adequately resourced. They need to be focused on important kinds of learning goals. They need to have reasonable assessments of whether they're making them. They have to have teachers who know what they're doing, leaders who can lead reform. Some of the schools are very innovative in their approaches. Some of them have taken advantage of the innovations that people have been developing in how we conceptualize school. But all of them, at base, are reasonably good schools. We can't continue to have a system where we're innovating over here, we're putting the rest of the public education system in a stranglehold of hyper-regulation, which holds them in a straitjacket, and we have a whole set of schools, probably 25%, that are failing because they are not resourced with the kind of people and systems that will allow them to succeed. So I'm going to stand in defense of systems and in defense of the notion that innovation, as we pursue it, has to be thoughtfully integrated into the way we think about how all kids get access to quality public education.
All right, now let me share our dilemma with you. You've just been privy to a conversation that we could spend the rest of the afternoon on, but we won't. All right, we won't. We're actually approaching our time limit right now, so I'm going to do the following. I'm just going to restate for all of us in brevity sort of what I'll take to be two competing theories of change, all right? And then I'm going to ask each of you a question about the theory that you have advanced. It seems to me that Rick has basically made an argument that the way to get the results we need is to invent or create entirely new structures. We need to attach a new and more compelling set of expectations to those structures, and we particularly need to learn how to execute. We need to actually figure out how to do the stuff that we decide we care about. He doesn't believe that systems inherently know how to pull this kind of stuff off, and the evidence is probably to some degree on his side on that. Linda says, in effect, systems work or need to work. So we need to think systemically, right? We need to support systems. We need to build their capacity to do what they need to do well. We shouldn't expect systems to work if they're under-resourced and don't have the kind of policy infrastructure and accountability systems that hold them together. Rick, I'm curious about two things with regard to your theory. How would we get the scale that the country desperately needs? We have already proven, many of these folks in this room are implicated. If we come up with a good idea, put enough money around it, give it enough time in the oven, it typically, a nice cake comes out. But getting that to repeat in larger and larger ways is really difficult. The second part of my question is, do you worry about the inequalities that might emerge from this kind of theory of change and improvement?
Sure. No, these are both terrific questions. First, actually, I think the challenge of scale is that systems, as they stand, have, right, they give us the comfort, the mirage that we're solving these problems at scale, but we're really not. If we look at REN 2010 in Chicago, we look at Joel's efforts to turn around low-performing schools, we look at heralded urban reform efforts, whether it was Alonzo Krim a quarter century ago in Atlanta, or the Houston effort a decade ago, that we see a lot of headlines and see a lot of attention and philanthropic support lavished on the flavor of the month. And when we look back from a space of 5 years or 10 years, what we see often seems to have disappointed. It didn't deliver. So when we talk about scaling, I would argue that our notion of using these existing systems with all of the baked-in impediments actually doesn't work nearly as well as we like to tell ourselves. Now, that said, it is entirely true that when we look at the realm of people who are solving specific problems, KIPP or Achievement First or SEED, trying to build particular school models, Teach for America or Troops to Teachers, trying to recruit people into these roles, they are remarkably slow at growing. You're going to be, 3-4 centuries downstream before they really make a big dent in terms of educational landscape. And that's actually part, from my mind, of the problem of trying to do this all through nonprofits. Nonprofits have a wonderful trait, which is that they attract people who care passionately. They tend to err on the side of executing perfectly. They tend to gold plate. Funders, when they look for somebody to go recruit teachers, they want folks who are going to do it the way TFA does it, which means TFA, every iteration, adds a new bell and whistle. If we really want to see scale, the folks who serve millions of kids, SchoolNet, Wireless Generation, Tutor.com, which has trouble getting school contracts, but serves 1,800 libraries in the Department of Defense. These are for-profit entities, and they have unique frailties. They will cut corners. They will rip you off if given a chance. But that's the flip side of their strength, which is they are always looking how to do this more cost effectively. They are always looking to grow. And Wireless Generation and SchoolNet have 5 or 6 million end users. This is remarkable scale, and these are organizations that are a decade old. So I think part of the problem is when we talk about scale, when we say we want schools that work, and we want somebody to build the entire school soup to nuts, and we want them to take it elsewhere, it's like saying, hey, Chris Stebbin, you invented a neat stent there. Why don't you start a new chain of hospitals that features your stent?
I want you to speak to the equity.
And then okay, perfect. And then the equity question, real simple. Absolutely, this will yield inequities. No doubt. Some places are going to adopt first. Some places are going to contract smarter. You are absolutely going to see variation. There are ways to control this, of course. For instance, I would take issue with Linda on some of the questions about financing. Not only does DC's PS, for instance, spend $15,000, $16,000 operationally per kid, but if you do this thing called long division, looking at their outlays, number of students, they're actually spending about $24,500 per kid. It's simply that a lot of these expenditures are off budget, given the way that, that the FASB standards attach. So I would argue we actually spend a lot, and these districts have it in their power to rethink the way they do business. But right now, these resources are tied up in too many bodies doing mediocre work in anachronistic structures. And frankly, I am perfectly happy to concede that there will be some unevenness and inequities inevitably with this kind of reform. I'm suggesting only that it's a less bad option than our current stagnant inequities, which I don't see us getting much traction on.
Linda?
Ready, set, go, or do I have to listen to a question first?
You got to.
Go.
Well, just, do you really think systems can innovate? What's it going to take? And do you think it can happen fast enough?
I don't know that systems themselves are the places where innovations start. I don't disagree with Rick that sometimes innovations have to start outside of systems. But we also need systems that are prepared to innovate around what systems are supposed to do. Because otherwise you have systems that create, and I don't disagree with Rick on this, that create a stranglehold in which you cannot plant and grow the innovations that you've been hothousing outside the system. So we need, for example, and that's why I point to some of the places where there have been systemic innovations, where people have moved ahead. Back in the 1990s, there were a number of states that created very thoughtful performance-based assessment systems where kids were engaged in serious, challenging intellectual work. NCLB wiped out most of that. We're going to have to regrow it again. But those systems allowed a lot of other things to grow, like some of the innovative school initiatives that Rick is pointing to that I also support. I would not consider things like Renaissance 2010, however, to be systemic at all, or what Houston did. They didn't build a strong pipeline of well-prepared teachers and leaders. They didn't look for a way to leverage the quality of instruction in those schools, and they were not highly successful. You need to look at places like Montgomery County. If you want to look at systemic reforms, that's one of the largest school districts in the nation, now predominantly students of color, now substantially low-income students. It has changed enormously, but they've also changed the way that system operates. They've rectified a lot of long-standing inequalities. They have invested in a higher capacity teaching and leadership workforce. They have innovative schools operating, various kinds of, Montessori elementary schools and a variety of different kinds of high school strategies. Long Beach, California, one of the largest systems in California. But they pursued the pieces that allow every kid to go to school knowing they're going to have teachers who know what they're doing, principals who know how to lead a school, have the resources they need, and then you can innovate within that. You can bring computers, technology, you can bring new learning models, you can scale up. I like the way New Tech High is approaching a very systemic way of taking that model to scale. So you can bring the two together, but you've got to have both in mind. Otherwise, we will continue to innovate and not be able to plant the innovations on fertile soil.
All right. Thanks to both of you. First, let me